In dealing with Jesus as our good shepherd, we have to look at the way things were in Jesus' time. If you see how it is today, you see flocks of dozens of sheep being driven by dogs. That wasn't Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, the shepherd had his sheep, and they knew the shepherd personally. They would recognize the voice of the shepherd, and they would follow the shepherd. And the shepherd knew his sheep by name and could call them by name. And that's what part of the gospel is today. Jesus saying about calling them and they follow him. But that was the shepherding in Jesus' day. At night, sometimes they would gather flocks from a bunch of different shepherds together in an enclosure to keep the sheep safe from wolves and stuff. And in the morning, the shepherd would call his sheep, and his sheep would come out of that crowd and follow him. And so the thing about it is, it's a call that we are the followers of Jesus, and Jesus calls us, and we are called to follow him. And I think it's not that God gives us orders to follow, but we have to be very responsive to God's call to us in life, where God is calling us to and what God is calling us to. That call can sometimes change, sometimes it's permanent. My mother was a good example of that. My mother grew up on a farm. Her mother died when she was 14. And she kind of took over a lot of the women's work in the house and on the farm. My mother wasn't afraid to work in the fields or barn. And so she kind of took over this position of working in house and taking care of my grandfather. And after some years of this, she kind of thought that that would be her life, taking care of my grandfather, taking care of the farm. Well, one day her brother Alfred threw the whole thing out the window. One day he showed up with this Benoit guy. Let's say the rest is history. So our call can change. But for us to be responsive to God calling us, your call can be your state in life, your call can be your job, your call can be your relationship to other people. It can be in a number of things. But for us to be sensitive to God calling us to where God wants us to be. I know in my own life, I was a Glenmary brother, and the call for priesthood came, and it wasn't from me because it wasn't my idea, I'll tell you. But it came very strong, and it came to the point that I had to act on it. And I can honestly say it was a call beyond myself. Be aware of God's call. What God calls us to, what God wants us to be. And that means having a very sensitivity to life. Sometimes I say it's like going through life with your ear to the ground. What God may want you to do. And the other thing in life, what are your talents and abilities? What makes you the special person you are? And how do you use that specialness that is only you to build up God's kingdom? Where is God calling you to use your talents and abilities that makes you very special to build God's kingdom? One experience I had that kind of hit that home to me, my first pastorate, I was in Tazewell and Pocahontas. And I ended up dealing with this family, pretty dysfunctional, and their middle child was having a lot of problems. And he had this very thick, hard, protective shell around him. Well, it so happens, years before, I had worked part-time as chaplain at a youth development center, like a reform school for young men. And there I learned how to get through the thick shells that these kids had protecting them. And so this kid, who had one of the thickest shells I ever dealt with, I knew how to do it. God gives you the talents and abilities sometimes to do his will in life, and we have to be responsible. And like very few people would have ever had the experience I had coming to this young man. But I always say, in God's plan, there are no coincidences. And so, where is God calling you to minister and work in life? And it could be some very small things. It could be some larger things. It could be a change in lifestyle for you. And where is God calling you in this new lifestyle? Because the Good Shepherd calls us to follow him. And we have to have the sensitivity to know his call and to follow.